Hey guys, it's Maple here once again, and my first character of last league in Legion was a Bladestorm character. And when I played that, it was pretty fun, but it was very much a starter character, and it didn't really scale all that well into the endgame, and as we later found out, Bladestorm was bugged anyway. I think it was something like the initial hit wasn't actually doing much damage, and it was mostly just the Bladestorms doing the damage, which is a pretty big gaff, but I don't remember exactly what the bug was. We just remember that it made Bladestorm a lot less effective than it could have been. So I've always wanted to come back to Bladestorm, and this time around I wanted to make sure it was pretty damn nice, so I did make it as an Inquisitor, converting all of my physical damage into elemental in a similar sort of build to the one I did with Blade Flurry Inquisitor last league, which was one of my strongest characters for the league. One of the most well-rounded. It's got a lot of DPS, a lot of life, a lot of sustain and defense, and I'm trying to bring that similar sort of approach to a two-handed version with a katana as opposed to just a usual Void Forge, which was probably going to be stronger, but wanted to craft a katana and actually play with a shaped katana for the first time since ever, because I always use Void Forges, and then just get a bit more of a defensive feel on a character without using an Abyssus. So this is an Inquisitor with Fizz to Ellie scaling with no Abyssus, and then just using Bladestorm. So you can use a few skills with two-handed swords, and typically I'll be doing something like Static Strike, Consecrated Path, Sweep. There's plenty of things I have done, but one of the things you can now do is also Bladestorm. It does play very similarly to Sweep, and you'll see it's pretty damn close to the playstyle I exhibited with my Sweep Scion from last league, but there's less area on the initial hit. It does less damage than the initial hit of Sweep, but then it also has these traveling Bladestorms. And for plenty of the content out there, it almost feels like you're playing a totem build. Or at least if you look at the Blight content, you basically throw out a few little Bladestorms and then sit and wait for your damage to be delivered. And it does kind of feel like a totem build in that sense, only really for these Blight encounters, because you throw out your Bladestorms and then just sit around and wait. And usually it kills everything that shows up, and it's a pretty effective way of getting through the Blight encounters, and it's just almost lazy even. I don't feel like I have much to do. So it does separate itself from Sweep quite profoundly in that way, because you just have so much bonus power from your after effect, and all in all it ends up being a very powerful skill once scaled to these damage levels and area levels that I've got it to, because it just seems to have some real viability or utility in its after effect damage, and then it's quite powerful in the end. I think currently my build's at 4 or 5 million Shaper DPS, and the single target is just surprisingly huge. And as well as that, you can kind of become more of a ranged character by throwing out a few Bladestorms or Sandstorms and then running around in circles if you need to, while being more of a defensive character at the time. The area isn't too huge though, because Sweep just 1-for-1 will be a much bigger initial hit, because the skill does definitely rely on the secondary Bladestorm part as well. But the way we've got the character built right now, you can see I freeze a lot of enemies, I'll then shock a lot of enemies, and the damage is pretty damn meaty too. The playstyle of jumping around with Leap Slam is one you have to really try and fix with a lot of attack speed, otherwise it'll feel kind of slow. But as an Inquisitor, I did ditch my Quicksilver Flask just so I could get another flask in and run the classic Gatorade setup of lots of extremely powerful multiplier flasks, and you can see the single target here pays off big time. These are only like tier 9, tier 8 Elder Guardians or something like that, but holy shit, the pre-fire nature of the skill and then just the huge hits of the initial swing are actually pretty nuts and should make for a very smooth endgame farmer, and quite possibly a very nice delve character too, thanks to just being able to freeze everything, have a wide AoE, and then the residual after effect of the damage. Haven't really tested into full-blown endgame yet, just done this Elder and then also a Shaper run, but I think the damage is looking pretty damn meaty for something that I don't think is anything too special, and can be done with a Void Forge, which is currently a 5C weapon. For some fucking reason, every single league really doesn't take off on the price range, and is still one of the most powerful weapons out there. So I want to show you guys how I've built the character so far. So here's my current character, level 90, Weeb next door, Katana, neck, girl next door, yeah, you get it, Inquisitor. Anyway, the character is currently based around a shaped sword, so we wanted to just utilize a exquisite blade for the first time since they became really popular. Haven't actually used them, always do Void Forges and stuff instead. And the idea is to just get the attack speed double damage roll and then some good prefix. In this case, I did manage to hit flaring and then remove whatever else I had. I then multi-modded it. I still had a spare prefix, so I ended up exalting on 2 socketed melee gems. That's not a very good stat, but it's not terrible. Otherwise, you could easily just like put on hits can't be evaded, for example, which would fix my accuracy and be very worth doing, but I chose not to do that because it's a 3 exalt craft and I just wanted to balance my accuracy instead. Now it is a pretty impressive sword. It's 587 DPS, I think, with the double damage mod, so you can count it as more like a 700 plus DPS sword. But on top of that, they're not that hard to craft. So I've got another one here that I rolled with tempered instead of flaring. I've got one that I rolled with extra fire damage, which is a nice sort of in-between mod, not quite as good as the flarings and stuff, because it does take up a prefix, but you could multi-mod around this sort of thing, and then just put the fizz and then have a very nice prefix. And ideally I was going for something like this, but maybe an extra cold damage one, and I did hit a few certain ones like that too. Ultimately, with 2,000 or 3,000 alterations, I did hit several swords that I could be happy with. And the idea is that you're just regaling every single double damage, every single flaring, every single merciless, just about regaling all these kinds of things in case you hit 2 good prefix-suffix combos, and then you annul until you get some sword you're kind of happy with. So it's not like super impossible to craft, but it will take a little bit of currency and a little bit of effort to make these sorts of swords. And one like this compared to the flaring one is something like 5 to 10% less DPS, so it's not a very big deal how good the sword is in the end. And ultimately can build around Void Forge if you want. Put Void Forge in the build, but you'll have to build it a little bit differently because it usually really wants an Abyssus for some flat fizz. You want some other flat fizz throughout your build, like Herald of Purity, rings, amulets. Just flat fizz becomes a lot more important, whereas with this build I didn't really need flat physical damage at all. So we have this sword that we're basing the character around, and then using Bladestorm. So Bladestorm's got 120% damage to begin with, and then it can cast out 3 Bladestorms. And if you're in Sand Stance, they travel along like this and become kind of little minds of their own totem thingos. Or you can have the Blood Stance when you press your blood and sand, which deals a lot more damage and becomes much more single target based. So it is nice for that because you can go from your AoE to your single target at the press of a button, and then they are very static but deal good damage on their own, and yes, they can stack up and do individual damage. There is a Bladestorm Helm enchant that gives you +1 to Bladestorms, which I don't currently have, but you can imagine a 4th Bladestorm on top of the 3 you have is going to be a big increase, so it's a pretty good helm enchant, but don't currently have it. The 6th link here is Bladestorm, Pulverize, LE damage with attacks, Fizz to Lightning, melee damage, and increased area. And then we swap in Conk Effect for single target. So we are currently full converting using Fizz to Lightning and the Hrimsari gloves, so it should be 100% conversion on our weapon, or on our Bladestorm, sorry. And then we've got a Devouring Diadem that lets me, with a Enlighten, run a 50% Aura of Wrath, 50% Aura of Hatred, and a 25% Herald of Ash. All those things combined do quite a lot of extra damage to a conversion build, but the main point for Wrath is because I've got a Watcher's Eye that has another 23% physical as extra lightning, so you get that much extra physical as extra lightning from the Wrath. You get an extra bunch of physical as cold from the amulet. You get a bunch of extra Herald of Ash buff effect, which on top of the Herald of Ash you currently have, is going to be another bunch of damage too. So in the end, we do have about, let's say a baseline 100% physical converted, but then you've probably got about another 100% extra, thus pretty much doubling the skill's effectiveness in damage. And then you're just trying to get some elemental damage with attacks, accuracy, life, resists, just the usual shit. But the main core of the build is converting to elemental and then being an Inquisitor so that you can completely ignore enemy resists, and you get some real good utility from Pious Path, so you don't need any flasks for sort of freeze, cold, anything like that, and that lets you run the Gatorade setup of Taste of Hate, Serious Promise, Diamond Flask, and a Lion's Roar. And each flask is pretty damn powerful, and it's pretty defensive setup as well, so we shouldn't take too much damage in the end. Now, I did choose to run Carcass Jack just because I wanted kind of to fill out my area as much as possible on the character, but overall it's a pretty shit chest. You're much better off just using a usual MAME or a MAME crit chest, Astral Plate, whatever. You can get so much more life, so much more defense and damage, but this gives you the best area that would be slightly nicer for clear speed, though I'm not sure it's at all necessary. And you can definitely play lots of different skills here. I did try out Flicker Strike, for example. It's very effective and fast in this setup. You can do lots of other things too, though. Sweep, Ice Crash, Static Strike, whatever you can with two-hand swords will work nicely in this setup as well. Lastly, I will say, got Precision, Summon Ice Golem, Blood Rage, and Blood Magic here. So my Precision is on Blood Magic. It reserves a little bit of life at the moment. And then I've got Faster Attacks, Fortify, War Chief, and Leap Slam. And then my 5-link in here is just a single target setup, or for larger packs. And that is Orbistorm's Curse on Hit, Assassin's Mark. So I don't have an Assassin Mark ring. And then it's got Onslaught and Blind. So it's a utility Orbistorms that you don't really press too often because it's a little bit slow in this type of a setup. And then it does help you get power charges, more crit, onslaught, and blinds the enemies. If you're building the character from scratch, I mean, it's a pretty simple battle tree. You just go through there. Ideally, I think you're going down here first and then respeccing into that later, because this gets you through here quicker. Just through here into the duelist area, get some generic two-hand damage, and then start to become crit and get all the juicy crit nodes. Lots of crit nodes on the tree. I did also pick up these. Not too sure if it's worth it yet since I've already got so much extra damage, but I'm grabbing that as well. And then you got to fill out some accuracy, some crit, stuff like that, and try and get yourself as close as possible to hit cap. Just for a quick little POBing, this is currently what the damage looks like, about 1.8 million DPS on the initial hit, and then the Bladestorms themselves deal 900k damage each, so 3 Bladestorms, the initial attack as well, you're looking at several million damage, and that's with the current weapon I have. If you import one with no flaring and instead use a bit of extra cold or extra fire damage, it's about 1.6 million. If you use a Void Forge, it's about 1 million, but you've got to build around the Void Forge and do more flat physical. So that's it for the explanation. I will probably have a nice video of this character smashing the end game because it feels pretty good so far. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.